I just want to say that I'm really, really excited to have everyone here and to hear all of your poems for the Asimov's analog poetry anthology. It has been such fun putting this project together with Emily, and I'm very, it's important to us at Interstellar Flight Press to support speculative poetry. It's something that I love and I've always wanted to publish an anthology like this, and just getting to kind of do that and work with the poets and work with Emily is so cool. So we really love speculative poetry at Interstellar Flight Press. It's something we're dedicated to. And this anthology is a huge part of that because to me, I think about it in terms of like, I love to kind of read the old pulp magazines, and poetry has always been a part of that history, right? But it just kind of usually gets ignored. And so it's very cool to, see this anthology come together and get to see all of the poems. And I cannot imagine how Emily managed to pick them. It must have been so challenging from the very long history of the two magazines to go through and pick, which poems to pick. But you chose a really great theme, and all the poems are kind of along that line. The book is out this week. It is in existence. You can order it, on bookstore websites, on Amazon, on all of that. So please grab a copy of it and, leave a review. That is always super helpful. If you love poetry and you want to see more poetry out in the world, especially speculative poetry, it really helps us if you leave us a review. Yeah, and so we're gonna get started. I'm gonna have everyone kind of turn off their videos so that we can just focus on the people who are gonna be reading. And then Emily, let's chat a little bit about the book. Are you super stoked that we're finally here and the anthology is in the world? And like we first had this conversation about this book, what, like, gosh, it was a while ago, like 2-3 years ago
A
at
year and a half. Yeah,
Worldcon.
at Worldcon in
Yeah,
Chicago. Yeah.
yeah. We were at Worldcon and you were like, I want to do a poetry book, or I don't know how we got talking about it, but I was like, yeah, we should do that. And it was really great. So I'm excited.
Me too. I'm so grateful that we came together on this, and you've been so great to work with too. I feel like we mesh very well.
Yeah, I think
Like the
so.
poems. Hopefully
Yes.
you all agree.
Yeah, I agree. It's so great. I mean, again, like I don't know how you had were able to choose them because I would have struggled because there's so many great poems in both Asimov's and Analog, and it's just it's awesome to see them in an anthology and just to see like major magazines recognizing that like poetry has been a part of the magazine, so yeah.
Yes, and I mean it's been a long history of poetry actually for both magazines, which is so great. So when I started at the magazines 13 years ago now,
Wow.
there always has been such a long tradition of poetry in them, which was a delight for me.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so before we start with our poets reading, I have some thank yous. First, I
Definitely.
want to thank all of the contributors, of course. Thank you for trusting Asimov's and Analog with your gorgeous poems. Thanks to Holly at Interstellar Flight Press for making this anthology a beautiful reality. I have it here and it's so pretty. I'm going to hold it in my hands. Big thanks also to Joy Brienza, Carol DeMont, and Abby Browning for their support in getting this anthology into the world. It has been an immense privilege to edit this collection. I've been selecting poems for Analog and Asimov's for a little over a decade. I didn't start doing it right when I started at the company. And this anthology basically represents that first 10 years. And narrowing down the poems, as Holly alluded to, was probably one of the hardest tasks I've had professionally. ultimately, the decisions were made by the conversation that started to take place between the poems as I was sifting through. I mean, there are so many anthologies I feel like I could have made with all of the poems that didn't end up in this one. But these ones were right to be together with each other, if that makes sense. And each poem in here is really special. And tonight you'll hear a small selection. We didn't have time to have every poem read, but hopefully it'll whet your appetite and you'll order the collection. And I'm going to be introducing the poets who will then read their poems. We're going to go in order of the table of contents so that you can kind of feel the journey parallel to the book. And then after the readings, Holly will do some Q&A, right? Perfect. Okay, so we're going to start with our first section, which is titled The Sum of Broken Parts. And we're going to be hearing Postulate 2 from Timmons Isaias.
Hello. I wrote a series of poems based on Euclid's axioms and postulates. This is postulate number 2. A straight line, she was told, goes in opposite directions simultaneously, never stopping. My life, she thought, the knowledge not helping.
We are next going to hear from D.A. Shaolin Spires, Atomic Numbers.
Atomic Numbers. We played Candyland with the periodic table of elements. You slid down to 79 AU. Australia, you asked, packing your bags? Gold, I respond, a ring I slid across your finger. Precious metal for your circuit boards. Then we climbed 73 steps, and you were 6 again, pointing at monkeys, feeding the penguins, all the carbon life forms held in the artificial zoo. Next, we rolled an 84, hurried down to 88 to the city hospital, and held hands as radium-223 alpha particles battled the cancer snaking around my great-uncle's prostate, penetrated deep into his frail bones, as the luminous paints in his bedside clock blinked 226. We trekked to cobalt, to cobble alloys for the jet engine that we took to the farthest square, put on our masks and suits, and breathed the filtered air. Oganesson decayed around us. The fringes of our known elements, bulk of protons and neutrons, the Costco of particles, mass clump like a brain, formidable CXV, I. As we returned, we thought about our lives, the AG in our cupboards, 147 plates and bowls, forks and spoons, dishes and suppers from the accumulation of years. As we glide by iodine, the photographic film reveals our 53 myriad poses, your victory sign as you ruffle my hair and my arm clasped around your waist. To atomic number 10, when we first met, you were biting on a cigarette, searching for matches in front of a dump of a club. I offered you a light. Then you released from your lips a ringed puff, dissipated, wisped up towards the glow of the red side neon, with the letter R blinking, so sometimes twisted script read, cosmic heat, and sometimes it read, cosmic heart. The luminous rouge of the sun flickering, reflected in your eyes and your ruddy cheeks. It was cold. I shivered looking into the sky, thinking how could something so prevalent in the universe be so rare on Earth? A noble gas, your noble chin.
Now we're going to hear 2 poems from Jessy Randall, who is tuning in from afar.
Faye Adzenberg Seelove, born 1926, died 2012. Inadequate research publications, they told me. So much bull. There was an inadequacy, though. No women's bathroom in the science building. I'll use the men's, I said. I didn't escape the Nazis to let a urinal scare me. They'd already tried to lower my pay. As if, I said to them, as if energy levels of atomic nuclei can be argued with, as if physics are negotiable. And then I have a second poem. These are from Mathematics for Ladies, poems on women in science. Mariam Mirzakhani, born 1977, died 2017. I paint mathematics in creatures. write my notes in Persian. They say this article may be too technical for most readers to understand. I say, try. They say one, and I say infinity. They say dead, and I stay dead. They say study, experiment, postulate, and I look out the window and see it complete. They say first, I say not last.
Thank you, Jessy. That poem leads perfectly into our next poem titled Mathematics by John Ciminello.
Mathematics. I once understood the formulas, the mathematics of timing, the algorithms of risk, and the calculus of forgiveness. Now, I'm not so sure. In my youth, I questioned the square root of sacrifice, the bleeding, radical abundance nailed to the tree of algebraic not marvels. Now, I wonder if I can spare some change. Then the multiplier was everywhere, a token of kindness. 7 times the reciprocal of grief circulated like a lucky coin, the currency of children. Now the coin is missing. If I discovered a page of math homework from my youth, would I recognize the penmanship, the confidence of the 7s, the passion of the 9s, or the prime mystery of 11? Now and then, I seek proof in the missing pieces of this equation, something less than the sum of all its broken parts. Across this gap of time, this spectrum, this range of all things being equal, I find myself on one side, you on the other.
Now we are going to head to our second section in the collection titled Impressions in Time. And we're going to start with 2 poems on time travel from Christian Macaron.
Recipe for time travel in case we lose each other. Snow or a snow globe. Mars at the end of September. That wish I gave you. A map with both our footprints. If you can find one, a wave in a mountain, or a portal under the sea. Cherry empanadas or red chili at Christmas. The way it feels to be still Halloween without candy or candles. A subspace highway without guardrails or an unbound timepiece. Your captured quest or my buried treasure. That bar that was falling apart somewhere around us, somewhere in the future. It's not the end of the world yet. And then my second poem is Time Traveler at the Grocery Store, circa 1992. Some days it's hard to believe that there's not something wrong with the lettuce. It's too green for the world of dust that's coming. The berries are machine eyes, but too fragile. You can't even look at the cherries anymore. Some days it's hard not to think that this milk has already spoiled in the future, not to mention the avocados, so fleeting they may as well not even exist. You press your fingers into the bread loaf. It reminds you of a body already gone. Some days it's hard to remember what sleep feels like, or quiet, and how blood is supposed to run through your veins in a way that is not murmured chaos or time rearranging. This version of you was forged so far from here. Some days it's hard to not fill a basket with canned goods or cereals, Fruit Loops even, and tell the mother next to you that it's impossible to buy too much dry pasta, but that there's something wrong with the lettuce, probably, and to buy mangoes while we have them. It's hard not to notice some days that some of the aisles are already covered in dust, or spend all the money on first aid. You almost always do. You walk past the dusted shelves. Something is wrong with time there. There is such a thing as time travel, And maybe there's a portal in the aisle next to the freezer. Some days it's hard to wait by the cash register and unfill the basket, one thing at a time. It feels like hundreds of things. Your body trembles every time the bell on the door rings and swings in strangers. The two halves of you are hope and worry. Some days it's not the loss, it's the waiting.
As people are noting in the chat, there was so much good food imagery there. So now we're going to hear a kind of different impression in time from Brittany Hawes reading Billet Doux.
Billet Doux, with a nod to Tom Brink. In brittle limestone, alongside Archaeopteryx, your sneaker print. On a cavern wall, in red and yellow ochre, your waving hands. In crumbling cuneiform, a hasty message about your day. On rolled papyrus, wish you were here, in careful hieroglyphs. In colored strands of knotted llama wool, your ETA. The kettle cooling as I wait to hear you knock. Any minute now.
The next section is entitled Entangled Particles and brings us themes of physics and biology. And starting us off with that section is Josh Pierce reading Three Body.
The heart is a Sputnik the size of your fist, once caught in the influences of what body tugged it at a distance, once sending radiorhythmic pulses across such speechless voids, now sent to its graveyard orbit halfway up, caught in the throat, not quite out the mouth, of sinking sensation, now only a hazard to other orbiters that may collide with it.
Next up, we have Robert Frazier reading Neurologic.
Neurologic. The idea of the mind, whatever the heck that is, has been evolving for a very long time, and still is. Neurologic. Before lipid exchanged imaging or DNA tagging or MRIs, before Galvani or the De Humani Corporis Fabrica of 1543, the notion of mind seemed widely unformed. Simpler, certainly, but no less intriguing, for Aristotle considered the brain a kind of cooling mechanism for the blood. But from what I've seen of this world, it's the head that inflames the heart, with love's causality and burning losses, while blood strives for a temperate climate.
Next, we are going to Holly Day, who will be reading All the Weight.
So this poem is inspired by and dedicated to my grandmother, who always sent me either a Bible or an encyclopedia for my birthday every year. It's called All the Weight. When I was very young and had first learned about atoms and molecules, I dreamed that I could see the empty spaces and solid objects, the great swaths of nothing inside of everything, the thin currents of electricity that barely held things together. I imagined that I could put my hands through the wall, or my foot through a table, or fall into nothing like a ghost. Sometimes I can almost feel myself as that child, could almost see those yawning gaps in the bones of my house, in the sidewalk stretching off to the bus stop in the morning, and the bus itself as it comes lumbering down the street. And I wonder if it's only blind faith that keeps me from exploding into a clutch of disconnected atoms, flitting off into the cold daylight, like tiny moths or motes of sparkling dust.
And now we have a very particular field of biology, entomology, with Lola Haskins, who will be reading field notes.
The first one is Marmosia sanguinea, and the date is Wheeler, 1916. Thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, lit on the blackthorn bushes atop Mount Armour. Then struggling balls of males formed around each mating pair until one by one the balls collapsed. And as their scurrying contents rose up the size of my boots, even I, a man of science, was afraid. Marmosia rubera. And this is Fahrenheit 1876. He saw clouds of ants gyrating in the air above a small beech tree near Stonehenge. Their paths intersect like the red daughter that lays its tiny blossoms over gorse. Then the ants spiraled upward like a tree gone to flame, and when his cheeks turned hot enough, he joined the others, dancing around the stones. 3. Ants who enslave other ants eventually become incapable of doing anything but fighting and preening, and would, if not for the work of their prisoners, starve. E.O. Wilson says, there is no conclusion to be drawn from this. 4. Certain beetles introduce themselves to passing ants by raising their abdomens to be licked, rather like a dog offering his bottom to another dog, and releasing a tranquilizing ooze. Then, since the pheromones they emit remind the potential host of his own, they are ceremoniously transported into that worthy's chambers, and for the rest of their lives, fed whenever they tap a passing worker with an antenna and present their mouths. Some of these freeloading beetles even change their quarters in the winter. Bert Holdobler, writing in Scientific American, remains carefully in the realm of insects.
We are headed to the 4th section of the book now, and this one takes a more metaphysical turn and is titled Dispatches. The first reader for this section is Ian Go, who is time traveling here from 12 hours in our future. Thank you so much for coming in to read your beautiful poem, Taxi Ride.
She sits faint in the back seat of the cab, her hair long and dark in the mirrored glass, but gleaming as though she'd just stepped out of the shower. Where to, I ask, but she doesn't turn to answer. Mina Mihama, she finally whispers, and we wade through streets of floodwater, an overturned tea house, and the soaked remains of high schools and hair salons. When the first waves came and carried our lives away, others were stolen from bedrolls as returned bounties to the sea. Do I tell her her home is no longer there? Do I mention the dim figures reposed in puddles by the roadside, their legs crisscrossed, staring at starry-eyed glances in the low tide? Of the beastmen prowling the thrice-washed rice paddies, or the firemen at Tagajo honoring last cries for help? Calls that only cease once their heads dip low in prayer at the head of Genkan, long submerged. Of the old ladies in their seat cushions drenched in afternoon sips of kombucha and last kisses upon foreheads, or the salarymen who howled in the street to be taken instead? I do not. Somehow, I know she already knows these tales. As I turn past a row of lantern offerings, I glance into my rear view mirror to see her staring straight at me. Have I died? She asks, her eyes shimmering like ocean waves on the eve of a Matsuri Star Festival, before she fades into her doused hearth, finally home.
We are going to stay on that theme and go to Mary Soon Lee, who will be reading Packing for the Afterlife.
Packing for the Afterlife. The cadence of her father singing hymns. Sheep buying to each other. An Irish accent. Saturn through a 14-inch telescope. Pole top perched pelicans. Wood smoke. Hatteras Beach before the tourists get up. Gull prints in the sand. Holding hands.
And now we're going to go back to Robert Frazier for Final Dispatch.
This is Final Dispatch, and it's about last words, final last words. And what would they be like for someone who has disconnected themselves totally from Earth's civilization? Final Dispatch. Out where the stars thrum in short wave, who'll find this lightship set adrift? Sweep the cosmic dust from my grave. Hoist out my black box treasure trove. restore the burnt core of my love. No more code to thread and rethread. No new ideas to drive through my head. So discharge my soul in section 8. Convert me to transcendental matter. Lord, let me die in an ionized state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That last line is so memorable. I just love it. So next we will be hearing from Ashok K. Banker, Music Remembers.
Music remembers. Music remembers all the memories we forget, holds them in safekeeping until someday, when stopped at a red light, a radio in another car beats an old song and your mouth floods with cold water. There is no asking forgiveness after the light has changed to green and cars honk and pass you with fingers raised. Only the memory of the memories delivered by that snatch of music and half-remembered lyrics inserted between your fingernail and soft flesh like a splinter. Why does the mind wander through breakfast, asking for bagels when coffee has soured the taste of greed in boardrooms filled with hot lawyers wielding gunmetal laptops? There are no lyrics to the new song you do not want to write, yet must paint silently in the emptiness of your apartment while the half moon looks over the dresser and talks in hieroglyphics of paths never taken. There was a day, a monsoon day. The rain rushed down the hill, and somewhere a stereo on Altamont Road played the song that you danced to while cars splashed in slow motion. Spray thundered over the sea-face wall like a sea dragon looming. You might have kissed once, perhaps twice, and her lips were cold, but hot breath on your ear drew in the notes like a symphony written on water. Music remembers all the details time cannot hold in its cupped hands and saves them in a monsoon cloud for future downloads. Music remembers what the heart forgets. And someday, when you least expect it and are stupidly unprepared, pays it back. Every last bad decision, youthful indiscretion, wrong turn, accounted for with compound interest.
Thank you. Another fabulous ending. I feel like so many of these poems have these really strong, powerful impacts at the end. So we are moving into our last section of the book, and that's titled Off the Map, which looks forward into the unknown. And we're actually going to start with a poet we've heard from before. Mary Soon Lee will be reading How to Go 12th.
How to Go 12th for Valentina Tereshkova. Know your place, a woman's place, 11 paces behind the men who lead the way. Know your duty, know how to shine without ever diminishing what they did. Orbit the earth 48 times, alone, your stomach queasy, but that view, that vast, untrammeled revelation, as unequaled, as uneclipsed as you yourself.
Next, we are going to Jackie Sherbo, who will be reading Inside Voice.
Inside Voice. My hands miss the lip of the ceramic bottle as I try to drink up all the constellations. My nephew is nervous at the space show, and I have to admit I'm a little scared too. I want to float to the top of the planetarium's dome. I put my hand on his shoulder and squeeze it into nothingness, and all the colors making up the light trip down my fingers. He has so many questions I can't answer. I tell him so many lies. Later, I'll be surprised by how vehemently I can believe that anyone ever needs to use a quieter voice.
Our last poem for the evening is Leslie J. Anderson's Your Homeworld is Gone.
Your homeworld is gone. The sand from your childhood is in the ocean now. In glass, on the rugs of a man in Seattle, a woman in Mumbai. The carbon you wear is borrowed. Your molecules, the pathways of your mind, shift like dunes. The sky is not the one you remember, and even memory drifts. There is no home, not the home you knew. There is no you, not the you remember. The ground itself will give way. Congratulations. You are like everything.
I just absolutely loved it. I think we have one request in the chat for Emily if you want to read Jane's poem, because it would be cool to hear it.
I would love to. I don't want to steal Jane's thunder, but since we can't get her.
Oh, there's technology, you know.
I know.
It's always a little quick. We went by quick, man. You guys are good at staying on time. These are good poets. Sometimes I go to a poetry reading and people are not on time. So I appreciate y'all for keeping it quick. But yeah, why don't you read it, Emily? There we go.
All right. I hope I will do this beautiful poem justice. So it is titled, What a Time Traveler Needs Most by Jane Yolen. What a time traveler needs most when going back to childhood, a solid plan that can be forgot, an adventurous spirit that can be curbed, lust for the road that can turn off to rest, desire for the next hill that can stop for a drink, and for the lost times, the loose times, the left times, the botherations, hesitations, frustrations, privations, and all the other aberrations that lead to growing up again, one good old-fashioned compass rose.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks everyone. So feel free to turn your videos back on, y'all, since we're done with reading, and if you want to, say hi. But yeah, thanks everyone for reading your work. It was so great. I always feel like it's really special when I get to hear a poem read by the poet that I've only read on the page. It's like there's just something so magical about that feeling, and everyone did such a fantastic job. You are all excellent at reading your work. So so Emily, I want to ask you kind of about the structure. You chose the poems and then you went through and made kind of sections out of them, and just kind of what that process was like for people who kind of maybe haven't done that before, and kind of picking which poems went in what section and everything.
Well, I lived in a nest of paper, basically. I would say for a full week. It was hard. It was very, very hard. As I said before, it was really hard just choosing which poems, and I sort of I don't know, some of them sort of stuck to each other, if that makes any sense, in my mind. And I was like, these poems belong together, and then they started sort of accruing like a snowball when you're building a snowman. That's how I chose the poems ultimately. So in some way, I kind of knew there were themes, obviously, that were coming up again and again, which is how they spoke to each other. But then when it came time to sort of braid the manuscript together, that was very tricky because there were themes that really overlapped. We have a lot of things coming up, space travel, conversations from across great distances, which all ended up being together, space travel conversations, and then also conversations with the dead, because that was to me, those were emotionally the same thing. But things like the atomic structure of everything and general physics. It was like I had to divide up, like, this is atomic and it belongs here, and this is more a different kind of physics, so it goes in this section. And then even the space travel, I kind of divided up because there was exploration, right? There was this theme of exploration, and that's not necessarily the same thing as like being in space or like the astronaut's heart, right? Like that poem didn't belong in the same section as the space exploration, but it is about being in space, traveling in space. So I guess I just sifted through these giant piles of paper and like moved them around a lot. I wrote a lot of notes. I became very intimately acquainted with all of your beautiful poems as I kind of like wrote the themes on the tops of each page to see like what themes are coming up in this one and that one. And then they coalesced into these 5 sections, which I then tried to put in an order where as the reader, you'll be like making a journey, you know, starting in one place and then ending up somewhere else in a way that hopefully feels smooth and coherent.
I think it works. Of course, because I published it. But yeah, I mean, I love the sections in the book, and you did such a good job of like doing that hard process of like, how do we make these poems talk to each other? So, and that's kind of your larger role too, it seems like, with the magazines. It's just like, you know, having to like make poems that fit next to short stories and stuff. So yeah, I imagine that's a similar process. Does anyone have any like questions for Emily or for like other poets, or about the anthology, or about speculative poetry in general, or Analog Asimovs, or just comments? Feel free.
I have a question.
Brittany, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question for Emily because you were mentioning how Asimov's and Analog have such a long history of publishing poetry, alongside the short fiction and essays and all of that. And I was just wondering if you noticed any ways that like your tenure as editor of poetry has been different from previous tenures that you've observed. That do you think that it's been different while you've been editor from what you were seeing in previous editions of Asimov's and Analog?
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely brought my own tastes into it. I also have like plumped up the poetry in Analog. Like I think before I started reading the poetry submissions and choosing the poetry for Analog, we would have like one poem a year, maybe one poem every couple years, and now we have 2 poems in every issue, like it's very structured that way. So we've added more because I saw this space for it, you know, a space that wasn't being used by fiction. There was ways to make room without cutting into the fiction at all, and it just felt like readers enjoyed it, you know, the poetry, and of course I enjoy it. So Trevor and I both felt that it would be great to just bring in poetry full time, you know, to 2 poems per issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like there,
Yeah.
and like there is space, like kind of literally with like print, right? Like you have a little bit of extra space. Like this is kind of the history of speculative poetry in like magazines, is that there was a little bit of space. So they were like, what can we put here? Oh, we can put a poem. Like we have space for that. Yeah. So, but literally also you're making space for poetry as a genre within SFF, which is, it's a big growing part of the genre. So yeah. There's a couple questions in the chat, but I think Stuart, I want to make sure if you have your hand raised that we answer your question.
Sure. So kind of following on from that, like changes in poetry over time, and what you were talking about earlier with splitting things into like the types of physics or the types of space exploration. I guess this is just sort of a general question for any of the poets who'd like to answer it. What do you think of when you think of speculative poetry? Like when you sit down to write a poem, do you have like a clear idea of the boundary between like quote normal end quote poetry and speculative poetry, or is that kind of a shifting fungible boundary?
I'd say it is definitely a shifting boundary, and the poems that have showed up in the last 10 years, and certainly further back in Asimov's, and now much more in analog, just show that that it isn't just about spaceships and guns or all those sort of cliches that the movies hang their hat on. We explore all sorts of areas, and I'm not sure when I sit down that I actually know that I'm writing something speculative, but somehow it always happens that way.
May I cut in someplace? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Because I can't see me because I'm still videoed out. So first of all, I think that if you put poems in with fiction, it gives you a chance to breathe. I think it's really important to breathe. And people who do I do a lot of readings because that's what I do. And if you don't remember to stop and put space, then you lose your audience because they can't keep up like that and they can't switch so fast. So poetry is just like a bench, and it's a really important bench because it allows you to orient yourself in a slightly different direction and then go on.
Yeah, I wanted to ask how you came up with the title, Heartbeat of the Universe, Emily, and also if there were other alternate titles that you were considering. And I'm also interested in that conversation you were having with Holly. And did the anthology look like what you guys first talked about? So
Yeah, it relates to like Jean-Paul asked about, kind of just like how many poems you started with, because there were 10 years of poetry. So maybe you can wrap that in. But yeah. How did you come up with the title, Emily?
So the title comes partially from a poem in the collection. In theory, I'm gonna open up to it. On 34 by Rebecca Siegel, and it's a poem about the image of the black hole that like took the world by fire. Like, was it like 4 years ago now? What is time? But the first image of a black hole that was circulating on the internet. And the poem is about like just mundane life, and then like how it fits with this huge, awesome phenomenon of the universe. And there's a line in here, the hum of the universe. And I like that line, but I didn't feel like it was quite right for the entire, like the title of the entire collection. And then I was brought back to how many heartbeats there are in this collection and how many hearts there are, just like the heart of the poems and metaphorically, and then also like literal hearts. So that's how the heartbeat of the universe came together. I can't remember how many titles we were talking about. Can you remember, Holly?
I don't think we talked about it. I think you were like, this is the title. And I was like, okay, that works. Like, I was just like, yeah, I mean, rarely, like that happens sometimes. Like I'll get an author, have a title and I'm like, I think we can do better than this. But you were like, this is the title. And I was like, that is the title. So yeah, it worked.
Yeah, if there were any alternate titles, they were just like minor changes to this basically the same title. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of like process, it was very like easy to work together because, Emily, as the editor, you did the majority of the kind of like heavy lifting. Like I left it up to you to, select the poems and do that stuff. And then we at IFP are just sort of shepherding the book into the world. And we love that, like we're doing all of the, like nitty gritty marketing book stuff. But, that's such a great relationship. It's cool that we can just kind of like you know, like you sent me the title and I literally did not even question it. Like, you know, like there's not been a choice you've made that I questioned. Everything was great. Yeah. And
You made
then,
it easy. You made it so easy to
oh,
do all
good.
this. Like
Good.
we were definitely a team. You
We
know,
try.
yes.
I try. uh, and yeah, I mean, so yeah, it's been very easy, and I hope all of our anthologies going forward are this easy because, you know, just and everyone is so lovely, and you know, you guys are all great poets. So I think that is about it for us, y'all. But thank you so much for reading your work and for bearing with Zoom and for joining from across the globe. So amazing. And for having your work in this anthology and trusting us with your work. We really, really appreciate it. Please grab a copy of the book if you don't have one, and plug it online, share it online, leave us reviews, mostly on Amazon because that helps the most, but anywhere is great. We really, really appreciate it. I will say really quickly, our next book launch is going to be for Andrea Kriz's Learning to Hate Yourself as a Self-Defense Mechanism short story collection, and that is coming out in May. And that's we're very excited about that one. If you like the poems in the anthology, you'll probably like the short stories that Andrea has on offer. So that's it. Thanks everyone. Thank you, Emily. We appreciate it. We'll have a recording up probably in the next couple weeks of this on our YouTube. So if people missed it, you can feel free to share it. And yeah, thanks everyone.